Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a French farmer by the name of Hector St. John de Crevecoeur, and he emigrated to the United States from Normandy in France in 1759, and he settled in the Hudson Valley. He married an American woman, and the astounding diversity of those that settled around him, his fellow farmers, was shocking to him. He said this, he said, it's a mixture of English, Scotch, Irish, French, Dutch, Germans, and Swedes. There was one family that he knew that had an English grandfather, a Dutch grandmother, an Anglo-Saxon son who had a French wife, whose 4 sons all married women that were from different places, of different nationalities. And Hector said, he said, from this promiscuous breed, that race, now called Americans, has arisen. He asked, what then is the American, this new man? And this farmer who came to America from Normandy in 1759, wrote this. He said, he is an American who, leaving behind him all his ancient prejudices and manners, receives new ones from the new mode of life he has embraced, the new government he obeys, and the new rank he holds. The American is the new man who acts upon new principles. Here, individuals of all nations are melted into a new race of men. George Washington told us that the bosom of America is open to the oppressed and the persecuted of all nations and religions. And that great American philosopher, Alexis de Tocqueville, that observer of American life, said in a letter, imagine, dear friend, if you can, a society formed of all the nations of the world, people having different languages, beliefs, opinions. In a word, a society without roots, without memories, without prejudices, without routines, without common ideas, without a national character, yet 100 times more happy than our own. Now, I'm not sure if any of those are completely accurate descriptions of what an American was or is, or whether those are commensurate with our understanding as to the foundations of this country. But they speak to this founding ideal of America, this place where you could come from any part of the world with any set of beliefs, with any religion, with any skin color, and become something that is uniquely new. Now, there were people here before those who traveled from far off lands, but to be an American is in many ways an invention of the amalgamation of faiths of peoples from all over the world. Both Hector and de Tocqueville talk about the leaving behind of prejudices when you come to this new country. Inherent in that idea is this belief of new Americans that the discrimination that they faced in other places could be washed away upon coming to a country, a land at that time, in which everyone was equal. Everyone started from the same place. And of course, that has to be true because this country was founded by individuals who were fleeing religious persecution, who thought that America was a place in which they could practice their religion freely, they could be who they knew themselves to be. And the reason why you hear such anxiety and anger and sadness from many in this chamber and from many people we represent is because what happened on Friday is an abandonment of American originalism. It is a walking back of the faith that we have held since the days in which Scotch and Irish and French and Dutch and German and Swede came to this country believing that they could leave behind prejudices. It feels as if we are shrinking as a country before our eyes. A young woman from Stamford, Connecticut, wrote me this beautiful letter, and I want to read some of it to you. And she encapsulates in modern language what Crevecoeur and Washington and de Tocqueville were saying centuries ago. She says, "I'm the proud descendant of Syrian immigrants. My great-grandparents' sacrifices to resettle in the United States have shaped my entire life. I've grown up very close to my grandfather, the first generation of his family born in America, and I know what my ancestors did to be here and how far we've come from the time in which they were persecuted and subjected to religious violence in Damascus. I was able to grow up around Syrian culture and appreciate how great-grandparents made it possible for my entire life to be from where they are now. To give you an idea, my grandfather went on to receive a master's degree and was a high school teacher and a guidance counselor. He also he was heavily involved in the Roman Catholic Church and quietly served communion in hospitals each Sunday. My father, second generation, also received a master's. He serves on hospital boards, and he's had a successful career in human resources. With their encouragement, I have begun a career as a journalist, one that I've dreamed of since I was in high school. In 2012, on the 100th year anniversary of my family's arrival in the United States, I was the third generation in my family to graduate from high school and enroll in college. I tell you this because this moves me every day when I go to work. How amazing is it that my family has gone from being persecuted for their religion to being able to hold jobs protected by the First Amendment? Surely this is something that my great-grandparents could have never dreamed of when they came here. And I embrace my career with the intention to honor their sacrifices. My heart broke at the executive orders to suspend the entry of refugees, specifically from Syria. I have looked into this extensively and recently worked on a story as a journalist on the process. Trump's order is nothing but xenophobic and racist. I was preparing to report on a family that was supposed to be coming to a community near me, but it now seems that family won't be coming now. How truly American it would have been for the descendant of Syrian immigrants to welcome a new generation of Syrians into this country. This is, for many, cataclysmic, because everything they thought about this country seems to be disappearing in front of us. And I understand that President Trump tries to sell this as something less than it is, that it isn't a ban on all Muslims entering the United States, it's just a ban on Muslims from a select set of countries. But these are countries that encapsulate over 230 Muslims. That's almost two-thirds the population of the United States of America, including some of the most populous Muslim nations in the world, and it is directly targeted at people of Muslim faith. It's just simply not credible to say that this isn't a ban on members of one religion from entering the United States, because it selects countries that are majority Muslim and then includes a caveat that if you are not of the majority religion, if you are of any religion that is not the majority religion, you can get around the ban and will be given priority to come to the United States. This is a Muslim ban that applies to over 200 million Muslims around the world. And it makes us smaller and weaker and less great as a nation. But Mr. President, it also makes us weaker from a national security standpoint as well. Let's step back for a second and just understand the context here. This country does face a threat, a serious threat. There are religious extremists around the world who have perverted the religion of Islam and tried to turn it into a doctrine of violence. And they are attempting today to do great violence in the Middle East and in other parts of the world, and they are trying to recruit attackers here on U.S. soil. But you are not likely to be killed in an act of terrorism in this country. In fact, on average, there have been about 3 Americans killed every year by terrorism. Now, I'm not trying to underplay the threat. People feel fearful. And as a body, we need to respond to that fear. They see these awful things happening on TV. And they want us to make sure that it will not happen to them. But you are more likely to be killed in this country by lightning or by an elevator malfunction than you are by terrorism. And so if you really want to talk about securing this nation, about protecting Americans, then the conversation has to be bigger than just banning individuals from one country, recognizing the real threats that are posed. And let me guarantee you this. If this ban goes into effect, if President Trump is successful with support from the Republican Congress in sending a message to the world that America is at war with Islam, then that number of 3 Americans killed by terrorism every year, it will jump, it will skyrocket. More Americans will be killed by terrorism. Why? Well, because today ISIS is on its heels. It is in retreat. It has substantially less territory than it ever has before, and that has robbed from it one of its primary rationales for existence, one of its primary arguments to those that it's trying to recruit into its fold, the idea that ISIS is forming a caliphate, a area of geographic control in the Middle East. That argument doesn't work any longer because the supposed caliphate is shrinking. The amount of territory they control is getting smaller and smaller, and most folks can see the writing on the wall, that it is just a matter of time before the Islamic State as a state is gone. But they have this second rationale for existence, this second argument that they proffer to would-be recruits, and that is that there is a war between East and West, that this is really about a long-term struggle between Islam and Christianity. And that you need to sign up with us because they, the West, America, the Christian world, is coming for us. Now, we know that's not true. And we have watched presidents of both parties make it very clear to the world that this is not the fight that we seek to engage in. Famously, immediately following the 9/11 attacks, President Bush said that the face of terror is not the true faith of Islam. He said that's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace. And yet the message that is being sent with this ban on Muslims from these 7 countries entering the United States is clear. The message is that the United States is at war with this religion. That we are at war with people of the Muslim faith. And as we speak, these recruitment bulletin boards are lighting up with arguments being made as to the true nature of America's intent against the Islamic people. One posting on one of these message boards said that Trump's actions, quote, clearly revealed the truth and harsh reality behind the American government and their hatred towards Muslims. Another posting on one of these extremist websites hailed Trump as the best caller to Islam. And another message said that the leader of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, has the right to come out and inform Trump that banning Muslims from entering America is a blessed ban. Now that's a phrase with very meaningful connotations. To the extent that these messaging boards are calling this ban on Muslims entering from 7 countries a blessed ban, it's rooted in a different phrase, something called the blessed invasion. The U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 became the starting point for the very insurgency that we are fighting today. And it was that invasion that was called by Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and the affiliated extremist groups that were drawn into the fight. It was they that called that invasion the blessed invasion. Today, on extremist websites, the ban on Muslims entering the United States is being called the blessed ban. This order is making this country less safe hour by hour. It is giving a pathway to rebirth for the very terrorist organizations that we had made such progress in pushing back and fighting back. And in Iran specifically, it will lead to this country and our allies in the Middle East losing the fight against hardliners who pose a threat to the United States, to stability in the Middle East, and to our sacred ally of Israel. In Iran, there is a contest between moderates, and that's a relative term within the Iranian political space, and hardliners who chant death to Israel, who don't fear a world war or a conflict with the United States. And with the signing of the Iran nuclear agreement and the lifting of a handful of sanctions on Iran, the moderates won a victory, and the population of that country, which is surprisingly pro-American and supported that nuclear agreement, were ascendant, potentially foreshadowing a day in which that country would no longer be a provocateur in the region, and instead could join in conversations about how to bring stability to the Middle East. Now the hardliners have been handed a gift which proves that America is an enemy, not just of the Iranian state, but of the Iranian people. Because remember, when we think of actions that we take against governments that we don't like, we first try to start with actions that specifically identify individuals in government, so that we make it clear that it's not about the people of that country, but about their leaders. And if that isn't strong enough, then we go to sanctions against commercial interests, against the economy writ large. And yes, those sanctions do filter down and hurt real people, but the sanctions are levied at the economy or against commercial actors. When you enact a specific ban on the people of a country being able to travel to the United States, you are levying that punishment directly on those individuals who by and large bear no ill will towards the United States. You're telling them that it's their fault. And the Iranian people will turn against the United States, will turn towards the hardliners based upon this action. This ban makes us less safe. It will allow for terrorist groups to rebound. And that's not just me saying it. Senator McCain, Senator Graham have said the same thing. National security experts of both stripes have testified as such. And I guess tonight I think back to the moment in which I first heard that candidate Donald Trump was proposing a ban on all Muslims entering the United States. And I remember the universal bipartisan derision that met that announcement. It was almost laughable. At that point in time during the campaign, if you remember, candidate Trump was flailing, he was weak, he needed to reassert himself. He needed to make news, and so he grabbed for the most controversial, most outlandish proposal he could make. And Republicans and Democrats here in Congress condemned it. Speaker Ryan tweeted this: "A religious test for entering our country is not reflective of America's fundamental values. I reject it." Governor Mike Pence said calls to ban Muslims from entering the United States are offensive and unconstitutional. A religious test for entering this country is not reflective of America's fundamental values. I reject it. Calls to ban Muslims from entering the United States are offensive and unconstitutional. I give credit to a small handful of Republicans here in the Senate and a small handful of Republicans in the House who have raised serious concerns about this ban with respect to what it says about American values or what it says about American national security. But there is utter silence from Republican leadership who only months ago claimed that if there was a religious test for entering our country, they would reject it. Today are quiet. The idea that individuals could come to this country without regard to their religion or their national origin or their set of beliefs, that has never been a partisan issue. Of all the things that divide us, that idea has been one that unifies us. And so, Mr. President, my hope is that there is still a chance that both parties can come together and recapture the essence of American originalism and can put this country on firmer national security footing, can continue the relentless drive against extremist groups like ISIS, who now find themselves at a point of potential rebirth. You've heard a lot of stories on the floor of the Senate today. And, you know, it's interesting. We have these incredibly compelling stories of real people who are caught today in the middle of this reckless, ill-thought-out ban. But there are 67,000 refugees that are currently in the pipeline to come to this country right now. This isn't about 100 or 200 or 300 or 400. This is about tens of thousands of refugees who are fleeing persecution and terror and torture. And of course, this is about the 230 million Muslims who live in those 7 countries who have been told that they are lesser, and frankly, every other Muslim in the world who believes that the message is being sent to them as well. And so these stories that we tell you are, you know, the tip of the iceberg isn't even accurate. This is a pinprick. Fadi Kassar and his family, here are his 2 girls, they left Syria in 2011 due to the epic levels of violence that Fadi was sure would kill his 2 little girls if he didn't leave. His family went to the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. But the way in which the UAE works is that if you have a job, you can stay, but if you don't have a job, you leave. And when he lost his job, they were kicked out. And that began an epic journey for Fadi and his family. These girls actually were born in the UAE, as I understand, so he was fleeing Syria to protect his family and his future children. And yet, they were kicked out of the country they went to. And Fadi then began a journey to try to find a home for he and his family. He tried to get to Europe via Tunisia, but he was detained and sent back to Turkey. He eventually flew to Brazil. He made his way to the United States by crossing the border with Mexico. Upon entry, he was detained. He was transferred to Miami. He was released, eventually found his way to Connecticut, and he applied for asylum. That was granted in December of 2015. Fadi's relatives in Syria were tortured, had been detained by the regime. His neighborhood was dangerous and deadly. Fadi and his family were exactly the kind of people that this country historically has been able to rescue from war-torn countries, from terror and from torture. His family had experienced torture. His children, were they to return to Syria, would face potential death. And he went through all of the processes that we asked him to. He didn't go into the shadows. He didn't hide. He applied for asylum status. It was granted in 2015. He followed forms that would allow for his wife and 2 daughters to follow, and those visas were issued last Tuesday, on January 24th. Originally, they had a flight that was scheduled to bring his wife and these 2 little girls to the United States today. But last week, when Fadi learned of the potential for this executive order, he paid $1,000 to move their flight up to Friday. And so his 2 little girls and his wife got on a flight from Jordan to Kyiv, Ukraine, eventually to the United States, but once in Kyiv, their passports and their visas were taken from them. They were sent to CBP, their visas were rejected, and they were returned to Jordan. They are back in their old apartment, these 2 little girls are, but they got rid of all their furniture. They got rid of all their clothes. Their neighbors have temporarily given them mattresses to sleep on. They don't even know where their suitcases are. And their father, who was ready to greet them at the airport here in the United States, may never see them. They are scared to death. I have 2 little boys who are the exact same age. I have an 8-year-old, and I have a 5-year-old. And I think about what these 2 little girls went through, getting ready to finally go see their dad, who had gone through an epic struggle to try to find some place in this world where his 2 little girls could be safe. He found it. He found it in America. He found it in my state of Connecticut. He found it just like hundreds of thousands of other people who fled war-ravaged Europe, who fled the bombing in Vietnam, who left Albania and Kosovo to come live a better life, just like they found it. And he was ready to go to the airport to welcome his 2 little girls, and they were told that they're not leaving. You're not going to see your dad. You're going back to Jordan and potentially, eventually, back to Syria. Imagine what those 2 little girls went through. And imagine millions of other little boys and girls like them who had in their mind this place called America, a place that would welcome them, who would rescue them from the disaster that had become their lives. And imagine that dream that was literally hours away for these two little girls extinguishing for millions others like them all around this planet. It's up to us whether that light, which flickered off on Friday, relights. It's up to us as to whether we rekindle the American dream, that idea of America from our founding. This is not irreversible. These two little girls, you could bring them here. We could choose to bring them here. It's up to us. There's legislation on the floor of the Senate right now as we speak that would rescind this order. It's our decision, right? There's 100 of us here. There's only 430 down the hall. There's only 535 of us. It's our decision whether these two little girls come to the United States or they go back to the war-ravaged home that their father left. It's up to us. It's not up to the President of the United States alone. He doesn't get to make these decisions by himself. Democracy allows for us to make a different decision. It's up to us. I believe that we can do it. I believe that we can bring these girls here. I believe that we can undo the damage that has been done to this country's security. I believe that we can get back on a path such that ISIS remains on its heels. I believe that we can recapture that idea of that farmer who came to this country from a far-off land, who looked in amazement at the amalgam of cultures and peoples and religions that was America. I know this sounds like hyperbole. I know that there are a lot of people out there that say, wait a second, this is just temporary. It's only for a few months. It's only for a few countries. But people are listening and watching. Which direction are we heading? Do we really care about the things that we have always cared about? Millions upon millions of people all across this country and all across this world are watching. What do we do? Is this a partisan issue? Or can we commit ourselves together to stand up for those basic ideas of America's founding? And there are two little girls that are watching most closely, who are watching to see if we can rise above partisanship and deliver to them the promise that has been made real for millions and millions of Americans who call this place home. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.